Model testing is an opportunity for a photographer and a model to build their portfolios together. A heartbreaking thing that I've seen is fantastic photographers being rejected when they go to get agency-represented models for their portfolio. When photographers fail at this, it's not because they're bad photographers. It's because they don't understand what an agency-represented model really needs. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Wiseman. I have a tutorial at Pro EDU about fashion photography, and I am going to be reviewing the submissions for the hashtag Pro EDU assignment that was about natural light fashion. So we're gonna get right into it. I'm gonna give reviews of various types on the images themselves, but the cool thing is I'm also blind as to who each person is. So that's gonna help me just make objective observations about each image and try to give you some constructive feedback. Okay, so first one. So this is a great use of depth of field, a great use of lines and angles. I have a slight sense that my verticals are off, but I think that's really just because she's not right in between that geometry. I think I'd like to see that in this instance. But I like some of the personal elements. I feel like she's being really natural in herself, and when you're doing more of a casual fashion or a fashion-inspired portrait, that's something that's really cool. So I like that. Very different here. I'm also gonna be a little surprised by some of them because I've only flipped through them a couple of times, so that's gonna be a natural reaction, is just to talk about them as I see them for one of the first times. So there's a lot of storytelling here. I think that's cool. I think that one thing I am not crazy about is the fact that it's hard for me to read his shirt, and I kind of feel like it's intended to be read. If it's not intended to be read, then I think it maybe needed to be edited out or chose differently. Otherwise, I feel like I need to be able to read it more. I also think that that line does take me all the way to the edge and around the corner. But it's cool the way that that yellow comes up and across. So I like the colors. I like the way that that's been used. Really cool. I think the main thing is just the little writing. Cool. I think you'll hear me say a couple of times that greenery is something that's really tricky in fashion photography. You have to make sure that you're using it in a way that feels special. I think anytime something feels like a lawn or a park or home landscaping, it starts to pull it out of the realm of fashion and more into the realm of personal portraiture, like senior pictures or whatever. So otherwise her pose and her vibe is really cool and edgy, and then the background to me feels a little more personal. I think I would work on that or find a way to make that greenery foliage match or go together with what she's wearing in a little more conceptual way. So this is a cool one to follow my point about foliage being a difficult thing to pull off in a fashion context. This artist has done a good job of desaturating it. That's not the only solution to making something fashion. I don't want to see everybody just like put someone in front of a tree and then desaturate the leaves. But trying to find creative ways to make something work with color or pattern or texture so that it elevates the foliage a little bit is going to pull it back into fashion more than portraiture. I think that's done well here, and I like that highlight. I like the perspective. I feel like even though we come into a knee that's foreshortened, it's still not unflattering the way it can be, so I think there's some nice choices that have been made. So I actually saw this one online when it was submitted, and I know that it has some motion to it, so if you find yourself curious about it in the Pro EDU community, you can see the way that it was intended with motion. I think all I'll say about, there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of really cool things. Like the tree is a cool compositional element. I like the way she's looking towards the length of the composition, leading your eye in the direction of the hill and all those other things. I think that there's a lot of great execution points here. If you're gonna go fantasy and you're going to make it fashion, the retouch and the composition has to just be so perfect. And there's a lot of great things here. I think the only one that my eye goes to is the area of the transparency in front of the tree. I think it's just because she's so small in the frame and that chunk of white is kind of heavy right there below her face level. And because that's a composited point that goes transparent, I feel like it's photoshopped. So I get kind of stuck there instead of kind of moving through the image. I don't have any real specific ways to say that could have been better if you'd masked it differently. I would just play with it and see if there's ways to make it so it's a little less of something that my eye lands on. And this is cool use of color here. I think it's pretty classic pose and composition in the sense that, there's some angles happening here. I think anytime you do something costumey in fashion photography, it's a good idea to make sure that you are really pulling off the character element. I think that would be really nice if there was some more detail in the background that told this story a little bit more. Because otherwise it's just gonna feel like you dressed somebody up and stood them in front of a wall, which, that's okay and that can really work. But when it's got that costumey element, it almost needs to have a narrative element too, a storytelling element, and a background would have really helped in this instance. This is pretty. I think there's a femininity to that you don't always see when people start pulling towards fashion photography. I think a lot of times people think edgy, so that's refreshing to see something really feminine. I like the pinks of it. The composition is a little odd to me. It looks intentional. It doesn't look accidental the way that she's sitting left of frame. But I still feel like I don't quite get why the crop is exactly where it is. I think I also would have liked to have maybe seen her hair come in front of her face a little bit more, because that highlight feels really strong on her cheekbone. I don't think it's incorrect photographically, but I just think that I kind of live in her cheek instead of in her eyes. So if she'd had her hair framing her there, maybe that would have helped, or if she turned her chin a little bit more towards her shoulder, that would have helped that as well. This is beautiful and classic. I think that there's a really nice use of movement of the hair, and the mouth being slightly parted makes it feel really spontaneous. And I think that's my favorite part of this one. She's really telling a story. She's really connecting with the camera. A lot of credit goes to a good model. And I think sometimes photographers get too much credit and not enough credit based on whether or not they have a good model. But the light is gorgeous. The retouch is really pretty. If I had to give some feedback, I think I would maybe frame it where there wasn't quite so much space at the top, but that's personal preference. I think with this kind of tight headshot, I like her fill the frame a little bit more. This is cool, nice reaction, nice strong light, use of shadows. And my favorite part is that even though you have that really harsh light coming from one side, you still have a rim on the other side, whether or not that's coming from a reflector or some other light source. You're still getting the nice shape of his face, even though there's a lot of darkness and a lot of shadow. So kudos to that. I keep finding my eye at that park bench. I don't think it's a deal breaker, but if I had to give one criticism, I might say, like, why is it there? Is it really helping us? You might not have had any way to get around it, but that might be something that to think about next time. Is there a way either to edit it out or to try to move him a little bit compositionally so that you don't have one background element that doesn't have a piece of storytelling? You could even probably crop it a little bit more on that left side, and it might make it a little less prominent. Cool. I actually did a bridal shoot recently on stairs, and it always seems tempting to be on stairs and you think it's going to be really easy, and then you stand there and you realize there's nowhere for the photographer to be. And so this is a good use of stairs. She looks long and lean. I think that's always nice in photography, in fashion photography, to have a little bit of an up angle. The biggest thing that my eye goes to is that the light on her eyes. I really wish I could see a little bit more in there. I think that if she had just turned her face up into the light a little bit more, this would have been elevated quite a bit. I think there's also a little bit of a mix of gritty and industrial in this that I feel like maybe a little bit of retouching. I'd have to think about it a little harder of exactly which elements I like and don't like, but I feel like I'm moving around a little bit and thinking too hard about the place that she's in and why she's in it in a formal gown. So I'd almost want to push it one way or the other. Either clean it up a little and try to make it a little more natural looking or try to push it a little more edgy. I'm not sure. Cool. I love street shots, to be honest. I just think that it's always kind of a fun execution. I think the verticals are great. The lines, it's hard to get a dancer to be in the right spot because they always start out in the right spot and then they go to hit their position and they're not where they began. So really good job on getting her hand right in the center of those verticals. That's a really tough thing to do. There's a part of me that maybe wishes her wardrobe was a little different, maybe monochromatic, or maybe not a pattern on the skirt, something that really highlighted her her movement a little bit more instead of being an outfit. But I can make an argument for having it be a street style shot. If that's the case, then maybe even more casual instead of, it looks like she's trying to have a cool fashion-y outfit, but it's still got a casual nature to it. And I get a little hung up on it. Oh, sweet babies. I'm a mama, so any pictures of kids being really serious is always gonna catch my heart. That's so sweet. Great use of light. Again, the foliage thing. I mean, here it's obviously a play on that. It's a play on it being a personal portrait. So I don't want to criticize the fact that there's trees and greenery and all that in the background because I think it kind of works here. I love the juxtaposition of, princess dresses and sports. And I think anytime you can bring that into a fashion shot and have storytelling elements that push and pull, that's always a really good choice. Cool. One cool thing about this one is I would kind of forget that it's a natural light portrait. Nothing wrong with it being natural light. We don't have to fake natural light as if it's strobes, but it's a cool thing to play with, to try to mimic the effect of strobes with natural light. So good job on that. I don't love seeing the lining of jackets. It's not always possible when you're doing a lot of movement to hide it all together, but I do feel like I get caught on it sometimes. In this case, I feel like I kind of do. I'd love to see that jacket buttoned or closed in some way, but the motion is probably worth it because it's cool. The blush being up around her eyebrow catches my attention too. In natural light photography, I find that the makeup has to be even more careful because natural light tends to soften things so much that when you have an edgier makeup look, it's a little harder to pull off. I actually saw this one when it was first posted. It was one of the earlier ones, so it stuck with me a little bit because there seems to be some comedy to it. I like that aspect of it. I wish it was maybe pushed a little bit more. She's got such a traditional pose that it makes it get caught somewhere between trying to make her look beautiful and trying to be a little bit funny with the statue. So I wish we could go one way or the other. Like, is it ridiculous that somebody, leans on statues? You see it in fashion photography all the time where a model's leaning on something kind of common but doing it in a dramatic way. Or is she just a beautiful girl in a beautiful environment? I'd like to pick between those two. So this is pretty. I like the color, I like the pop, I like black and white and bright colors together. It's always really dynamic. There's a couple of things that stand out to me. The first is the retouch looks a little overly smoothed. And I think when you have a more glamorous shot, you have to be so careful about that because it makes it look like you're trying really hard to make that person look a bit of an artifice beauty instead of real beauty. And I think that those things tend to start going into the realm of cheesy if you're not careful about it. And also because we have quite a bit of cleavage in the shot. Nothing wrong with a little sexy. I like sexy women, that's fine. But all those elements working together is gonna push towards sort of a cheesy poppy factor that I don't think is working as well as it could if there were more elements that were done that were surprising, like a really delicate retouch or an edgy element or something like that might bring us back from everything being glam, glam, glam. I also think that the pink is reflecting pretty heavily on the hands. It's just a nitpicky thing, but I think it could be something that guides you back up to her eyes. She's a beautiful woman with a beautiful body and a beautiful face, and I don't really want to be looking at her hands. Cool, so the gold is a cool element here. When you're using natural light and you're backlit, sometimes you get muddy textures on the face. There's not a lot you can do about it besides trying to reflect even a little bit better. I feel like that's holding this image back just a little bit, is that slight muddiness in the face. It looks like there's some use of dynamic range and retouch to try to pull it back out of the face, that get a little bit more light and a little more smoothness there, but I think it needs to be taken a little further, or if this project were to be repeated with whatever this cool background is, you need to have a little more reflection in the face to get just that same amount of luminance in the skin as there is in that background. Otherwise, the wardrobe's cool, her hair and makeup is cool, the other elements work pretty well. Sweet baby again. I love the dynamic nature of the pose. I like the expression in the face. The jacket seems well placed. It's hard to use hoods. I think a lot of times actually people, and this is obviously a kid in a portrait in real life in the rain, but I think a lot of fashion photographers try to use hoods and things around the face, and it's actually kind of hard to make sure that it's placed in a way that you really still get a lot of expression and light and life on the face, and you get the spontaneity of having the hood up and all that. So this is done really well here. Very cool light. Love harsh natural light when you can do it. I always like it when a model really cheats to the light and really absorbs it with their body language. That always is a great first place to start when you're using really harsh light, because it is great storytelling. It makes sense. It looks great to the eye. I think the biggest thing I would change is what she's wearing. Color-wise, it's fine. I just think that that hard light is editorial, which kudos to that. That's great. And the dress is a little more commercial, and there's a sweetness about it. It's also a little less flattering, where the waistline of the dress is sitting up here, and when she's leaned back, it's pulling straight out away from her, so I've lost her waist. So it's a little less feminine, it's a little less attractive than it could be. Pretty. Again, I'll make the point, when you use foliage in a background of a fashion image, you have to make sure that you are elevating it or using it in a way that doesn't feel everyday. I don't think there's anything wrong if this image were to be her senior portrait, but if you are trying to pull away from portraiture and more into fashion, be very selective with the way that you use nature and the way that you use greenery in the background. Maybe in this instance, an example might be to completely pull the greens out of that top third altogether and make it a deep dark brown or black. It would bring back in those darks at the bottom and back up to the top. Maybe if she'd been wearing a deeper colored top too, and like sort of had her position be a little more interesting towards the camera. All of those kinds of things would have taken something that is a genuinely beautiful portrait. No critique there when it comes to the classic portraiture aspect. But if we want to elevate it into fashion, those are some tricks that you could do to pull one direction or the other. It's a sweet portrait of probably someone's loved one. Nice use of colors. Purple and gold are always really nice together. Again, some easy tricks when you're going from portraiture into fashion, going from a smile to a serious, going from, just to keep repeating myself, the greens in the background to some other kind of post-production choice of depth or desaturation. Those are some tools that you could use there. Similar points from before, maybe have her be, if we want to make this more of a fashion portrait instead of a commercial portrait or a personal portrait. When I say personal portrait, I mean things like senior portraits, Christmas cards, all of that. There's nothing wrong with that industry. I'm just trying to give you a lens to look through portraiture from thinking about fashion. So in this instance, if we wanted to push this classic portrait into a fashion realm, more serious expression, more interest and lean into the way that she's coming at the camera would be cool. Maybe even taking her hands and kind of pushing them towards the camera. All of those kinds of things that feel a little out of the ordinary would have pushed this a little harder. A lot to look at in this image. The color palette is gorgeous. I love jewel tones and richness. I originally started doing a lot of my photography was also with commercial models and actors' headshots, and that was always a palette we worked with, so I'm really drawn to that. I think it's done really well here. Compositionally, it's working cool. I like the line at the bottom with the rug and the way that repeats and creates a triangle. There's a lot of really thought out elements in the composition. It's really cool. I'm gonna get nitpicky, but it's because it's a nice image. So, excuse the fact that these are really small things, but I feel like the jacket is a little less flattering than it could be. I feel like it either needs to be closed and maybe her arm brought in. This is a trick I have models do a lot, where I literally have them take their elbow and pull it into their belly button, and it just sort of trims everybody up a little bit. I feel like that would have been really useful in this instance. I think her hair is nice that it's away from her face, but it feels like it's been kind of tossed back, and it kind of looks like it needs to be tossed all the way the other way. It's pretty spontaneous looking, so that one's real nitpicky. The main one that, that catches my eye is the jacket. There's a part of me that feels like I want her to connect to the camera. I don't feel that way that often in fashion photography, but I want her, I think, to look at the camera, or at least bring her eyeballs closer to camera. I have a lot of whites of the eyes, and I feel like it's really leading me off the page. I don't know what she's looking at. It is following the light source though, so it works in that way. So if you really felt strongly about having her look away, I might just bring her eyeballs back so that I can see the color of her eyes instead of just so much white to her eyes. So personal portrait here, natural light is always nice in doorways. I think I saw the submission come through and that it's someone's daughter that was less than willing to be there. But, there's a coolness about that. I think that there's something nice in fashion photography when we catch that little bit of devil may care, slouchiness. So I would just maybe push that harder if she was really going to be reluctant to be on camera, but you wanted to submit. I think that there's something to be said for telling that story even more. Obviously, that might also require her to be even more willing, which maybe defeats the purpose. But really getting her to express that emotion the way that she's feeling in real time. I'd love for the door to not be showing, still having the doorway without the door. It's really something that takes me out of the idea that it was a fashion portrait, but I get it. Sometimes you don't have a choice. You got to work with what you have. If I was forced to do absolutely everything the same and change one thing, it would be the fact that that window at the top of the door is just going right into the top of her head. I would just try to place that a little differently with your body position and really try to push for her expression to tell a story and call it a day, because the cool thing about these Pro EDU assignments is we work with what we have, and I think that that's something that really allows for growth. Cool, so men's shirt, classic concept, beautiful woman connecting straight to the camera. There's a lot of classic elements here. So what could we do to push it even harder? She is beautiful, her body's great, so all of those elements are really working. So maybe adding the hands in a way that's unexpected, maybe a background element that I didn't see coming. Something that will tell me that you as a photographer are an artist that really thought more and harder about how to make a beautiful woman something bigger than a beautiful woman. What story is there that you could really pull out? What element is there? But overall, great shot, nice and clean, great connection to camera. Wardrobe choice is solid. This is maybe a funny follow-up because this is a bit of the opposite. There's a lot of expression and craziness to the story that this is telling. I think the wardrobe matches up with that pretty well. I guess I don't know where she is. I think when you have sexy images of women, I get a little nitpicky about who and what and why. So one little thing that I might say to this is, could we add a really graphic, colorful background that would push us a little harder, would take it somewhere that would feel more magazine or more fine art or something that just gives us another element to put her on. That soft bokeh, is lovely, but the soft bokeh works in a lot of situations, and you have other cool elements in the foreground that I think would really be helped by something supporting it. Cool, lots of red. I like the storytelling with that. I think if you're going to go red lip, I might have gone a little lighter in the eye. I think, actually, I'm processing this in real time, so forgive me. I'm coming up with ideas in real time, right? So I'm looking at all of this, and there's a lot of great repeated elements. There's the graphic nature of the background, and then the graphic suit that she's wearing. There's the balls. All those things are repeated patterns, and they have some sharpness to them, all of that. I think I would have allowed the sports theme to come up into her hair and maybe her makeup even a little bit more to bring that full circle. I get that it's supposed to be a juxtaposition, but sometimes it's nice to let us have something that goes together. Juxtaposition's cool until it becomes obvious or trite, and I don't think that we're in that realm quite yet here, but what can we do to make it make sense that we're pushing and pulling a little bit more? So yeah, if she had that high ponytail that you might wear in real tennis, but with that strong lip and with that cool suit and red shoe, all of that would be really cool. I think at the very least, I wouldn't have done a heavy lip and a heavy eye. One other nitpicky thing is don't love seeing the bottom of shoes. It happens sometimes and you have this really strong shot and it's there. I think if I had to, I would then at least, soften some of the detail on the bottom of the shoe so that it just wasn't catching my eye. I saw this one posted and the poster mentioned the lack of being able to see the stool. I think that is the biggest problem with it, so you already know. But for other people, it happens. It happens to me. I do a fair amount of model tests where it's a beautiful girl that's sitting on a stool. It's a very classic way to do portraiture, and you have to be careful if the stool doesn't have a lot of heft to it that you can see it really clearly. Otherwise, you get awkward looking images where the legs are covering the stool and you can't tell what's going on. So that would be the biggest thing I would fix here. I also think when you use a winter coat, you have to be real careful to make sure that it looks like you're featuring that coat. It's going to be featured. It's a coat. It's huge. So what else could we have done to make it look intentional? Could we have put the hood up? Could we have posed her in a way that made her feel like she needed that coat? Think about even from a sense of fashion advertising. If this was an advertisement for this coat, right? I think we often forget that in fashion photography, that great fashion photography is often to sell clothes or feature clothes. So if you're not talking about that with your visual language, you might be missing an opportunity. And I think that would have been cool here. Well, isn't this beautiful? I love all these elements. The golds are gorgeous. I like the bokeh in the foreground. The finger ornate elements are just gorgeous. I think that one thing that maybe I would do just to push this more into fashion instead of into portraiture or narrative or journalistic photography would have been maybe to tweak her pose a little and have her connect to camera, something that made it surprising. Because all the elements are just classic and gorgeous. The direction of light, since this is a natural light assignment, is really lovely. Classic portrait, really pretty. The only thing that I might say on this one that would have elevated it and would have taken it really far is just changing the pose. I don't think there's anything wrong with the pose, and that's why it's a beautiful classic portrait. But I think hands on hips is so classic that it can be to the point of feeling a little common. And so I think we want to think a little harder about the placement of hands in order to really take it to that next level. So touching the hair, pulling on the wardrobe itself, fidgeting with the hands across, all of those things would have taken this one more step. Hot girls in bikinis, guys. All right. I love a good hot girl. If you watch anything that I do, I will tell you that every time before I say this. I have a lot of really beautiful friends that I would just, love to take their picture all day long. But I think when you have a beautiful girl scantily clad, you have to tell me why. Because there is just so much of that photography out there. There's a lot of elements of this that are strong and executed really lovely. The light on her face still works, even though she's slightly backlit. Her pose, she looks confident. Her hair is flowing. Those things are all fine. But why? What's special about it? What's taking me another place? What's giving me a fantasy? What's elevating it to a point of a luxury brand? All of those things. And I'm being general here. I think that it's just a statement that I think about when I think about sexy women's portraiture is, what are you doing that I haven't seen before, and how can you surprise me? And I want to see that here. Even just a simple selection. She's got jewelry on, so that might have been an opportunity to do something that I didn't see coming. Could it have been really outlandish? Could it have been really edgy? Could she have laid on those rocks in a way that was very out of the ordinary? This is a very sort of sex-inspired pose too, not to take this R-rated, but it is. And so to me, I think all of those things. You have to also think from a women's perspective. Fashion photography, it's fine for it to be for men, but it also tends to, when you're really working in the fashion world, the consumer is women. And women love a fantasy too, but you have to really kind of make them want it, make them feel like this is something for them. So I actually feel like this is a bit of the opposite in some ways. We'll talk about the critiques of this, but I feel like this I don't know if this is a man or a woman that shot this, but I would be more More likely that this one was more likely shot by a woman than a man. Can't say that, but just because the wardrobe feels like a fashion shot because it's about the wardrobe instead of about the body. And I think that that's kudos to this one. I probably wouldn't have made that comment if it hadn't followed the previous shot that was a bikini shot. But I think some little critiques about this one, because this is a cool composition. There's a lot of cool things happening. The model is really doing her job here, really reacting beautifully to the light. I just think the highlights are too hot. I think that that's a bit of a problem. I'd like to see the jacket closed a little bit more. I feel like I see a little bit too much of the waist as well as the width of the jacket. It's just not really doing her any favors. I don't need you to make her any skinnier, that's not it. But when you have a jacket that the edge of the jacket sits on the edge of the body and then goes further, it's just making someone look really wide. And so you have to be careful to either make sure the jacket comes a little bit across the body or to make sure that it's somehow sitting flush against where that edge of the silhouette of the body is. Otherwise, it's just not that flattering. Again, those are nitpicky. I think the biggest one is the highlights are just a little too hot. There's a way to feel like you have that heat of the sun without whiting out your highlights. Cool, lots to look at here. I see 2 catch lights in the eyes here, so hard for me to envision what it is that's creating that light on the face by way of the natural reflection. But if there might have been some, structure that was creating reflection and then also a gold reflector there that's doing that. If so, cool, it created really cool lights on the face. I think that that's hard with backlighting. It's really hard to get something that's not hazy and has contrast on the face and all of that stuff. So that's what we're often going for. It feels to me more like a mixed light scenario. And that's one thing that's fun to play with. It wasn't part of this assignment, but and I'm not accusing anybody, just to critique this particular image and talk about that. Whenever you're doing mixed lighting, to be able to get a flare and that contrast on the face is kind of fun to play with strobes and natural light in that way. Composition's cool. I like looking up at her. I like the way that the suspenders like pull her up into the signage. All of those things work really well. Oh, that's so cute. I love a sense of humor. I remember in art school, everyone was doing all these like super edgy, mean kind of paintings all the time, and our professor kind of dropped everything one time, and he was like, all right, we're gonna do funny paintings. And we were like, how do we do funny paintings? Like, how is that even a thing? So, and now you might say that about fashion photography, like, how do you do funny fashion photography? This is it. You do something unexpected, you do something irreverent that sort of turns it on its head. We expect teenage girls in today's top trends. So it's kind of fun to see a family in slightly dated, not slightly, truly dated trends and playing with the idea of makeup and turning it on its head in the sense that like we all try so hard to get fashion makeup perfect and you have this little girl with makeup smushed all over her face. So, a cool takeaway for all of us in something like this is like, how can we do that in produced fashion photography? How can we take something that we all expect to see and just turn it on its head and even make people laugh? Dare we make someone laugh every once in a while in fashion photography? So that's really cool. One tiny critique, and I know that this is probably done on a tripod, is I just would love to see a little more space on the feet. There's just a lot of weight coming down because the little girl is so cute. So, you just want to try to leave enough room for the feet, but come on, everything else is so cute. All right, cool. Great color palette, cool pose. I think a couple of things that, I could get nitpicky on this one is, the first one is I do feel like I'm on the front porch of a house. I'm trying really hard not to critique that too hard because you guys did such a good job of trying to submit these things within the 1 week timeline. So you did what you could with what you had, and I am super proud of that. But just so that people have a learning opportunity here, I think sometimes we go, oh, it looks fine. And you have to be more careful. I think I would have tilted her just a tiny bit more and just lost the mulch. All the other elements could be made an argument for. They're graphic, you have the window, everything's got a lot of lines, and then the mulch really kind of brings me out of it. So I would have just tried to adjust it a little bit to bring that out. The pose is great. I do feel like she's maybe wearing a little too much makeup, but there's some classic elements here that are bringing me back around, and she's got that cool dyed hair, so it's got an alternative feel to it. So I don't know. That's going to be a personal preference thing. If she was a more traditional fashion model, I would maybe say that the makeup is a little too heavy. But in this case, I don't know. It works well with the shirt she's got on. Pretty, kind of a classic portrait feel. And a very nitpicky thing, I think I cannot get away from the fact that her dress is wrinkled. So you'll hear me talk, and if you watch my tutorial, about how really as photographers we're responsible for all the elements, even when we're being spontaneous, even when we have only a week to execute something and someone shows up with their own stuff. You really have to control hair, makeup, wardrobe yourself. And hey, let's hope that we all get to a point where we have these $1,000 a day stylists to help us, but even in those cases, people miss details, and as a photographer, the buck stops with you. So that's my biggest critique here, is just don't take the shot until you feel like those elements are really working in your favor. Sweet, great story. I feel like I can see that it's kind of cold because of the color of the grass and the blueness of the light. I think all of that's working really well, and the red pop of the chair is a cool contrast to that. I guess I kind of wish her clothes matched that a little bit better or pushed that a little harder. Maybe she could have been all cool tones or all warm tones. And again, I've already said this critique, the inside of jackets bothers me a little bit. I think that's very intentional here because it has that cool pattern. I just still don't think it's doing any favors. It reminds me of my kids that are about this age that just never want to button their jacket, and they're kind of always just like this. And I just think that would have maybe helped a little bit, is to pull that in, or ask her, don't force her, but if she'd be willing to take it off for a second, because jackets are tough. All right. Sports themed, cool light. This is a little more commercial, obviously, so I'm going to critique it more from the perspective of commercial fashion. And like this was going to be used in a sports apparel line or something. I feel like just from my thumbnail, it focuses off on the eyes a tiny, tiny bit. In commercial fashion, that has to be so spot on, and even though it's really hard in natural light. I've done a fair amount of commercial fashion work where we are 100% natural light, and we still have to get focused just spot on. So I'd like to see that, and that it's possible. It's possible that that's just resolution. I'd like to see the hair a little bit tidy, even though it's sports themed. There's just a little bit too much to me that's moving around. I do like the shape of the light on the face. Always looking for those triangles that then come down to the chin of where the light's hitting is really good. All right, another one with a lot of greenery and foliage here, and I just think that this is something that we talk about over and over again, have to be careful. It almost is it's funny, as a storytelling element in a situation where I can't see like the trunks of trees and the grass, it can work a little bit better because there does feel like some storytelling thing happening here. Like maybe it's supposed to be like poison ivy or like, kind of a primitive cave girl or whatever that's in nature. I don't know. Or Eve maybe is a better thing than cave girl. Sorry, probably like an Eve kind of thing. So yeah, but I think there's some things that are pulling me away from that ability to even dive in and go, okay, there's some implied nudity here. And I think, for example, her belly button ring, if we're really going to go to this like natural girl in nature kind of vibe, you have to be just so careful with all the other elements. It's like the bikini shots, if you're going to have things that ring like, ooh, implied, ooh, we want to, have a sexy takeaway from this. In order for people to not feel like there's a cheese factor to it, you just have to be careful with every single detail, everything down to the belly button ring, and then as big as the choice of your model. So when you do implied nude and swimsuit and all this other stuff, your choice of the model is really important. Their beauty has to be on point. The hair and makeup has to be on point. The things that you do have wardrobed have to be on point. I think that's something that's really challenging, but if you like that kind of photography, you have to be up for that challenge. And I feel like there's a few things amiss here that I just don't feel like are letting me dive into this image and go, ooh, cool fantasy. As a woman looking at that kind of thing, it just has to really push really far in order for me to feel like that cool factor is there in a really sexy image. I think one thing that was thought out, and well, there's lots of things that are thought out, but one thing that I can tell was thought out and looks really cool to me is the idea that there wasn't a lot of elements to work with because she's implied nude, or I don't know what you would call this exactly, but is the color scheme, right? So this person thought that if she's going to be in nature and she needs a green wardrobe piece, I think that was smart. And then the contrast with the red hair, I think those are smart choices. I just want to see more of those careful, thought out choices when we get girls naked or in bikinis. Let's really push to make sure that those choices are high-end choices, they are creative choices, and they really take me somewhere else, and they really make me think like, ooh, I wish I had thought of that or done that in a different way. I'm only really picking on this genre because it is so done. And so if you're gonna get women undressed, you better do it in a way that's gonna blow everyone's mind, because we see it all the time. So really push hard, really pull those creative elements, keep pushing those color schemes, keep pushing those details in the shot, and you're really gonna find that you take away from something that we see all the time and is very common, and you're gonna start really ending up in that fashion photography realm. Okay, next one, cool use of that natural light sunset as that rim light on the hair. I really like that. Whenever you bring in props, it's gonna feel more like a personal portrait. I think that's okay, but I think that, you know, if we wanted to push this into a more fashion realm, anytime props are in the shot, they're really gonna have to be used. So if you have a model having a handbag, they can't just like have it propped somewhere up on their shoulder, because that starts to look really cheesy and really like portraiture. So in this case, I think it would have been really cool to actually see her emoting as she used that violin. I think that would have pushed us into the fashion space a little bit more. I also think that the range of tones and contrast could have been changed a little bit. I really have a sense that the sky was recovered, and I really have a sense that I've lost a lot of contrast on the subject. So I think those two elements I also would like to see played with a little bit more, whether you do that with color or light or contrast but I find myself falling out of the story and really thinking too hard about those things. Cool. Sorry, just processing, lots to take in. And I'm trying to decide if that line on her lip is makeup or light. It looks like makeup. So that's an interesting choice. I think it's a kind of a cool choice because there's so many graphic elements here. You've got the grate and the stairs, and I actually kind of like the negative space that goes up above. I think that's rare for me to really feel like that's intentional, and I think in this case it works. I think my biggest complaint would maybe be her hair and her dress. Her hair just needs to be more careful. If you do straight hair on a model, it usually has to be really, really perfect. Otherwise, it just kind of looks like that's the way they went to their college class or went to the mall. And that's okay, but you just have to be careful about it and make sure that it's really adding to the shot and doing something for it. Either that, or I would have pulled it all to one side or done something that makes it feel like we really made a sharp choice about what that hair is doing. The dress is cool, and like there's something kind of structured about it, so it's like almost there. But I think maybe the color and the shape of it is traditionally feminine, and all the other elements feel kind of hard and masculine, maybe. So I think I would have done one or the other. I would have pushed the femininity and gone full on like ruffles or gauze or something really, really feminine, or I would have pushed the harshness and I would have gone darker colors, masculine silhouettes, things like that. Well, that's a pretty portrait. I really like the black and white. I really like the lack of retouch on the skin. I think that really works here. It tells a story, and that texture is just what makes this elevated. And I think a smooth retouch on the face would have done nothing for it because it's not a traditional fashion portrait. I think overly retouching something that otherwise it's supposed to feel spontaneous and real is a problem. So I could see this being used in a Patagonia ad or something like that. She's really connected to the camera. Her eyes are nice and sharp, and that skin is just it's really doing something for me that I wouldn't have expected from a shot that isn't traditionally fashion. Cool lighting here. I love patterned lighting. I've actually been kind of concepting an editorial shoot using patterned lighting because I just think it's one of those moments as photographers that we get a little geeky about. I mean, get geeky about a lot of gear and stuff, but I think light is something we all really love and that we find really magical and special. And when you can find ways to get light to have pattern, I just think we all just get a little like, oh, about it. Or if you don't, then I question, whether or not you really experience fashion photography at the level that you could. And you really try to find that joy, because that's one of the best things about being a photographer. So this is cool. Obviously that appeals to me. I like the fact that it goes all the way from the top of the hat down to the tip of the fingers. That pattern really goes in a lot of places. A lot of times people work so hard just to get a little piece of the pattern on their model. And they don't have the opportunity to really utilize it in that way. Composition's cool. The lines of the roof and the verticals all kind of work well. It's also very tricky using harsh light when it comes to a model's eyes. Like, are they in the light, or are they in the shadow, or whatever? And this is a nice use of the hat in that way. And the line of where the hat shadow just sat below her eyes, I think it's a nice choice. I think anytime you're using harsh light, you have to be intentional. And I don't have any perfect tips, but usually you end up having to really cheat to it. But this way, you get that additional option to lower the chin a little bit and use the hat. Cool. Sort of an unexpected crop and composition here, and I'm feeling refreshed by that. That's cool. The angle of the window is a little surprising to me, and I think it's because of the width of the lens that was used. So that's cool. It's nice to surprise your viewer a little bit with your verticals and horizontals, because they're correct. I can tell that they've been kind of adjusted to be straight, but they have a little bit of a wonkiness about them intentionally for optics, and I think that's a cool use of that here. Her pose is cool, even though that hand is kind of floating, which often I warn against. I think in this instance, because her eye is right at it, it still kind of works and feels spontaneous. It does feel like she's got that coffee in the morning look with the shirt, but it's not gratuitous, it's not, sliding off the arm, which would be beautiful too, but like the fact that you still have some mystery, like over the shoulder, and then you just have that one little pop of compositional element of the tree, I think it really works. I just would like to also maybe see it taken another step. Maybe she could be extending the arms above her head. Maybe there's a way to have another piece of furniture in there. I just think that there's some other ways to really take this to what you get with those cool Southern California celebrity portraits, where the lifestyle is being told. There's this carefree nature. You just push it a little harder, but I think that this got a lot of elements that I really like. I can usually tell when some of these are personal, and I would like to think that this is someone that somebody knows, and there's a sweetness about this one, but the biggest thing that I notice right away is that I can tell that the background is masked. And I know why people do that. It's because you really are trying to create a differentiation between your subject and your background. And when we're using natural light, that's challenging sometimes. It can be really flattening to just have the one light source of natural light. And so, when we have strobes, we can add rim lights, we can do all these other things to give us that depth and that separation that we want. And so this person obviously has attempted to do that through masking, but it's been made obvious. And I actually think it'd be less obvious if the chair itself wasn't so bright white. And that's my eye is just going straight there. It's just feeling like that chair is the thing that I'm supposed to look at most by being the brightest thing on the page, but also being so different than the background. So I think instead I would try to use other tools to differentiate my subject from the background. I would try to place her head somewhere in a darker space compositionally by just physically moving my body. Obviously, there's only so much you can do in a short-term assignment, but do other things. Find a different location where she really does naturally stand out against it instead of trying to use masking as a tool for that. I think I would also try to get her to be a little more natural. I think when you are in an environment where things feel kind of everyday found environments, like I feel like this is just a landscape you may have happened upon, then I think the posing needs to reflect that and needs to be a little more natural and authentic instead of quite so cute and sweet. And I think that that's just making it so I really feel like there was a lot of effort to make this work instead of just working with the elements that you already have. Okay. That's a lovely portrait. I feel a lot of intimacy there because of the crop. And I feel like this is a person that the photographer really knows and I want to get to know. I think in fashion, it's hard to have, and I'm just talking from the perspective of this assignment. Obviously, this is a really lovely portrait, so I'm just trying to get talking points going because this assignment technically is natural light fashion. I think from a fashion perspective, a close-up shot should probably be to camera just a tiny bit more. This feels much more this is a little silly to me to even be critiquing on this level because it's just it's standing alone. It's a great shot, but just trying to give you things to think about. But that exuberant of an expression so far off camera definitely feels more journalistic. It feels more lifestyle. And so I think that if we're all just going to take away from this close of a crop, thinking about your subject being a little more connected to camera, more inspired by beauty poses and beauty positioning, I think that that's something that you could work with. Love these tones. Love the stretch of the lens in this situation. I think that's really on trend right now. It's always on trend, but it's really on trend right now to do that. I kind of wish her position of her chest mimicked that and even gave me more sense of that. Her head does. I really like the way her head is up. That's something we've seen a lot in some of these things, that in using natural light, it can be a really useful tool to cheat towards the available light above, especially if you're out in open light instead of covered light. Because that you're naturally, even when it's shaded or overcast, or even when it's bounced around light, typically it's going to have a tweak of it that's slightly from above, and so that's working really well here because you're still getting those nice triangles on the face here. I guess I just feel like this could have been a little more about that line and that stretch. But great tones, composition's cool. I like a good sun flare when it works. So cool elements. Cool, this is got an edgy feel to it, obviously, and when you use edge, I think that you do what this person has done, and that is you have to make sure that you're connecting your model to the camera and making sure that all the elements work. I feel like we're really close on the pose, but we missed it just a little bit. I feel like the pose feels directed, like someone said, put your arm up there. And the reason that matters in this instance is because she's supposed to be badass. And a badass girl isn't going to pose, right? So I think for me to really believe the story and to really love this girl, I have to feel like she's doing whatever the F she wants. I don't know how family friendly I need to be in this. But so there's something about that makes me go, okay, somebody posed her. And I feel like that's a missed opportunity here. However, the type of pose could have worked in some ways because I like the fact that there's strength and there's angles and there's confidence and all of that. So I would just say play with it a little bit more, maybe go back through the gallery and pick one that just feels a little more spontaneous and real to the character that you've created. I guess if I had to do the arm up, like that's something that you feel really connected to with your work, maybe she really needs to lean into it or do something that really feels like, what in real life could she be doing that might make her move in this way? A model test is an opportunity for a photographer and a model to build their portfolios together. If you start in model testing, it's going to open doors in the fashion photography field. The end result that needs to happen in a great model test is that model looks their absolute best. When photographers fail at this, it's not because they're bad photographers. It's because they just don't know what agencies and agency-represented models really need. In this tutorial, you're gonna learn who to shoot and how to shoot them. Okay, I think we might do a hair and makeup change at this point. Exactly. That arm can even yes, one foot bent that way and turn this foot this way. You're gonna learn about working with modeling agencies to shoot quality models. I love that because that lengthens your legs, which your agents will love, so bring that back out. Kick that foot. Good. You're gonna see me shoot two different types of models. We're gonna take one model that's considered editorial. Go for it. Yes. And another model that's considered commercial. So let's do that hand. Let's wrap it around your neck. And then we're gonna lean in and give me a little laugh. Perfect. Love that. We're gonna use simple lighting, some natural light, some strobe. And then you're gonna open up your body to me as you come in here. So let's try it. Perfect. Yes, perfect, good. And simple camera techniques. I love when I come lower with a model and they look like above me. It just exaggerates that. To get the quality that you want in as fast as possible time. Good. I think we've got that. With this tutorial, you're gonna get my comprehensive posing guide. This is a great resource to see what types of poses agencies are going to want to see from a successful model test. Oh gosh, I love that. I'm going to give you an email template to send to modeling agencies. It's going to have the right tone and the right language that's going to increase your success rate. My favorite thing that you're going to get from this tutorial is my top secret packing list. It's going to make your process so much easier, and it's going to give agencies exactly what they want. Whether your goals are to build a new portfolio, monetize model testing, or take that next step in your fashion photography career, these resources are foundational so that those things are easy, seamless, and quick for you. Yay, Christmas. My husband's a children's book illustrator, and he loves all things Christmas. And so it's been Christmas at my house since like October. But this is a sweet way of using natural light. It's joyful, it's spontaneous, it's got nice movement to it. All of those things work really well. Two really nitpicky things that I would go for here is I kind of wish she was in the center of the trees instead of slightly off left. I don't mind the composition itself being off. I just wish her placement was in between the two lines of trees just a little bit more. I mentioned this in the earlier one about the dancing. When people are moving, it's so frustrating because they start out exactly where you want them, and then they'd go to do that move that you planned. It's not like don't know they're gonna do it, but I feel like there's always something unpredictable about it. So I just would have cheated her a little bit to the right first so that when she did that whip around, it really landed right in the center. The other nitpicky thing is I love the red shoes and I love the red bulbs on the tree, but they all live in the same compositional spot on the page. So I think I would like to try to find a way to spread those out. Whether, sometimes these things are not possible. Sometimes the circumstance in which you're given doesn't give you, oh yeah, we all would have loved that, Elizabeth, but that's not where they were. So, you have to get creative and think about ways to move your body up and down to place things differently on the page. Maybe she could have been a little further down the line to get her up a little higher. There's some ways to do that, but overall, sweet portrait, it'll be something that everybody, will be happy that you took. This is a really beautiful portrait that I might categorize under the personal portraiture side of things. We'll talk for a second about maybe how to push it to a more fashion image. But first, I just want to compliment the balance of the hairline and the light on the face. It's a really hard thing to do well. The light on her face is very clean and very beautiful. The highlight on the hair is a little blown out, but I'm not sure that there's really a lot that could have been done about that because it's a pretty bright time of day maybe. So I think in the lighting circumstances that were given in this particular instance, the reflected backlight on the face is just really handled well and pretty. I think that looking right at the camera with a big smile is often going to feel either like a personal portrait or a commercial image. And in order to push it to a commercial image, you need to tell me a little bit more of a story. So if we want to keep that eye line right at the camera and that big smile, it needs to feel really spontaneous. I need to maybe have wardrobe elements that are a little more complex, maybe even more cleaned up with the hair. Those kinds of things need to just polish up and get a little tighter in order to really push it towards a commercial advertising look. If you wanted to push it more fashion look, I just would, knock the sweetness down a little bit, give her a little more of a coy smile, straighten her head back out a little bit, get her a little more of instead of the shoulders curled up, maybe they kind of come down a little bit. Something that's going to push it a little more into the realm of edgy, but I don't think that this girl needs to go like funky edgy, but just something that feels a little more out of the ordinary. I think there's a lot of elements that would really need to change to push that even further into something truly editorial. I think that, anytime you're in a personal portrait context, there, earrings and necklaces and those personal elements are just gonna be really hard to translate into fashion. So great, beautiful personal portrait, beautiful handling of the natural light. Maybe try to add a few details in shot 2, 3, and 4 that might give this girl or you for your portfolio a more fashion version of the shot, but the version as is works well. Pretty portrait. And I'm just looking at all the little elements here. I think the reason that I had to take a pause too is because there's a lot of accessorizing going on in this image, and I'm kind of counting makeup in that. I think maybe that's something that I would either tone down or try to make work a little differently. She's a beautiful woman with this long flowing hair, very classically pretty, and she's got this bright color on, she's outside in natural light. All of that to me leans commercial. So I think I would try to push it one or the, it's kind of landing somewhere in the middle. It's somewhere in the middle of commercial, personal, and fashion. And let me try to break that down a tiny bit more. If I want to push it commercial, I want to see either a smile or a movement or something that feels more like advertising. Who is this girl? Where is she going to be if she was in an advertisement? Is she shopping? Is she doing whatever? If she's a girl in advertising, there needs to be a context. And I think that because of the bright lip color, the bright color of the shirt, and the earring, all of that is making me want more from the commercial side. If you want to push it more fashion, I would try to adjust the tone of the lip to maybe it can be just as deep, because I like the fact that the eye is really light, but if you have that deep, bold lip, I might go more browns or deeps or edgier tone, and that would feel a little more fashion than that bright pink. And then I might remove the earrings, and I might even do something other than a mini skirt. I actually use mini skirts in my work. I think they're really, really cute, but they tend to be cute. And maybe that was just an accident of my language there, but it's kind of what I mean by that. Mini skirts and a sweater and cute earrings and bright pink lipstick. There's a sweetness and a cuteness about that doesn't feel fashion to me. So, I might put her in a more menswear inspired pant or something really, really skinny black pants or something like that. And maybe she needs something that then adds a little bit of an editorial edge to the styling other than the earrings. Maybe it's a mid-brim hat, taking off the rings. I think that you'd have to really stop and think about who this girl is and where this image is going to live. It's because I kind of want it to really push one way or the other because I like it. I think the light on the face is beautiful. She's a beautiful girl. It's crisp. The composition is nice. The lines look good. So lots of things to push it a little harder. Look at that sweet baby girl. So this is a very stylized portrait. There's two different ways I could talk about this. I could talk about adding fashion elements to your stylized portraits. And maybe I'll start there. I think that you're already doing that. I think having kids in monochromatic palettes and unexpected textures is always a way to elevate kids' portraiture to a more editorial side. And I like to do it myself. If you go look at my portfolio, I actually have a lot of editorial kids' portraiture. So I think that those are cool choices. I think that if I really wanted this to be editorial, I would knock down the sweetness a little bit by maybe taking off the flower crown and really emphasizing that messy hair. I think that I would knock that sweetness out just a little bit. I also, the super heavy bokeh in the background with that super strong light flare is more like what we do with people's portraits that we want to make sure that they keep as keepsakes. And so I think if I wanted to push that editorial edge, I would actually crop it down a little closer to her, not worry so much of that post work of that bokeh. That I think it looks like a radial blur to me. And I would let her kind of live in that space with more texture, a little more grunginess, a little bit more rawness, and that would be more editorial to me. Yeah, actually, I think that covers kind of what I would say. I think for what it is as a keepsake portrait, there's maybe two nitpicky things I might say. One is that the highlights on her face are a little hot, and that front leg is so much brighter than the back leg that I lose the second leg. And so I'd like to see that a little bit more. But really, at first glance, it is a beautiful portrait of a beautiful little girl. And I think there's a lot of different variations that you could do within the same shoot to get versions that feel sweeter, maybe for your client, and edgier, maybe for your portfolio. This isn't that different from what some of the things that I just said. Trying to push and pull against that sweetness in order to try to elevate your own portfolio and balance what your client needs. I don't know what the context of this shot is, but let me just say as an example, let's say this was, she's a blogger. She kind of has a blogger vibe to me, and she needs some portraits done. And you say, oh, great, I'd love that because you're beautiful and you'd be really great for my portfolio. So how do you balance that like sweet, spontaneity, quirky vibe that a blogger needs that feels more like a personal portrait and you as an aspiring fashion photographer need for your portfolio? So a couple of things I would do, I would intensify that expression. I like the hand on the hair, but it feels a little prissy. So I would make that a little more like intentional, like models that are in the editorial space move with intention. And I think that I'm lacking that a little bit here. This is also really like circles us way back to the beginning when I talked about coats. I don't dislike the styling in this. I don't dislike her coat, but I feel like you have to, if you really want to push it fashion, you have to make that coat be part of the story that you're telling. So I want a little more of that. I want to be more intentional, like maybe about those buttons at the wrist level. Maybe I want to see more of her hand. I might want to, fix that pocket where it's not completely shut. Or if it's going to be frumpy and rumpled and all that stuff, which I do all the time in my work, I really like the undone vibe, partially because I like to not have to be so perfect, and it gives me freedom to do things spontaneously, to not be so perfect. So I might, have her knock it down off of one shoulder and emphasize. We often find ourselves, without double checking ourselves, finding in this like sort of meh middle. And so we want to push one way or the other. Do I want to perfect it, or do I want to emphasize the disorganization of nature, a little entropy there that sort of sends us off the edge sometimes. So this is an opportunity to do that. You really want to stop and check yourself. I have a beautiful girl in front of me, and I'm going to end up with an easy portrait. So what can I do that's more? How can I take it further? One last note, she's pretty enough that in the right environment and the right styling, she really could look editorial. I think this makeup is very, very trendy, and it's beautiful for her blogging portfolio or whatever she might be using this for. But for your editorial portfolio, you really have to find that visual language with makeup so it doesn't look so fall 2019. That's got something that really sort of takes it a little bit further. This is a cool breather for my eyes. We haven't really seen that much black and white. So I like this. I like black and white. I do quite a bit of black and white. The hair, the eyebrows, the beard, all of that really works. And just from a technicals perspective, the fact that the jacket is really nicely steamed and the lapel is laying really nicely, those are all just things I look for. And this is really, there's a real decisiveness in this image that I like a lot. If I was gonna get nitpicky, a couple of things is, just for the sake of this project, I want more from this guy. I feel like I maybe need a little bit of a wider crop that maybe I can see his hands, or maybe I can see him express in emote, so it feels a little bit like a man on the street portrait in some ways, but it's working in that way. But really to take it further into an editorial space, I want to see him connect to that camera and do something that I didn't expect him to see, or a man on the street might not do if he was just stopped by a photographer. But a lot of the technicals are really there. Looks really nice. Pretty. A lot of decision making with tones here. It's all about that monochromatic vibe. I like that. Feels more commercial, but it definitely feels like commercial fashion. And I'm going to credit a lot of that to the casting here. This is a quality model. And guys, if you're not finding quality models, that's something you've really got to look into and think, because it again, I've said this earlier, but a lot of times we get too much credit and also take too much blame. But really, the model in front of your camera is very, very important, especially if you really want that fashion look. So I like the fact that there's monochromatic elements to this. I kind of don't love the drain pipe. It might be an easy edit. It might be get a little hairy down at that place where all those corners come together. But that to me starts to take it away of the fashion fantasy of this cool, edgy stoop. It starts to be like, oh yeah, she really is just on somebody's porch. It's not a deal breaker, but if I had to pick one thing to edit, that would be what it is. The vertical of that blurry element, I think it's just one of the pole. It looks like maybe the shot is taken between the other sides of the railing. And the one that is blurry in the foreground a little more prominently, that vertical tends to lean, and I am real picky with verticals. I've actually been pretty pleased with these submissions because it looks like you guys are pretty picky with it too. This is a tricky situation because it does look like the verticals are correct in the overall composition, and as you get picky about this, you'll find that your verticals will be correct in some places and not in others, and some of that's a taste level thing where, not taste level, but a personal taste thing where you have to pick and choose some verticals, or some are, based on perspective, where is the center perspective and which vertical is that. But in this case, I think it's a cropping problem. I really don't think there's any way you could have made that vertical straight that's on the far left of the image. I I think that it needs to just be cropped in so that you couldn't see past that element. Maybe even lose it altogether, because I just don't think it's really doing much for the image. And if anything, it's making me feel like the image is leaned, even though that it's not. This is we haven't done a lot of, there's been a few, I guess, in the submission, but this is one that is very prominently supported through some color grading and some color choices. This is a cool use of it. The guy has great blue eyes. There's a blue aspect to his jacket, and obviously the blue sky. And this photographer has really done a good job making sure that they all blend together and are also complementary with the slight orange desaturated vibe of the skin tone. Those really push and pull for me. The mock turtleneck is nice because it's a nice fashion, like just a little bit of a period at the end of the sentence, because most guys don't wear mock turtlenecks. And so to have those little things in your shot with your styling that just take it one step past normal reality, one step past what you can buy or put together at the mall, is really going to give your audience a sense of, oh, this is special, or this is elevated, or this is done in some city that I don't live in. Those are all things that you can really do that are just really simple tools to take your otherwise simple portraiture that maybe you're doing for seniors or weddings or whatever else, and then just saying, I want to make it just a little more fashion. I want to add that one more fashion element. An unexpected wardrobe choice like that can really help. Cool composition. It's not always easy to just do something that's dead center with space above the head. Those are actually sometimes qualities of imagery that's not working, because it tends to be where you want to focus things or whatever. But in this instance, I think because it's got a little bit of that C curve, that those clouds like guide the eye through, but they don't come off the edge too much. I think it really works. It's a nice image. This has got some cool color contrast that gets me kind of excited. Love the orange and blue combo. It's just such a nice visual treat when those two things come together in nature with natural light. This is something I just talked about, but it's just such a nitpicky thing for me. That vertical on that cone. And I don't know, and it almost doesn't matter. That cone or that tube, it might be actually an exhaust tube, I guess, coming out of a manhole. That makes more sense. But it might be leaned that way. But in this instance, it's just kind of hurting my eye a little bit, that it's just a little bit off. Perhaps you played with it the other way and it still didn't work quite right, but it's one of the first things I see. I don't know if maybe in real time there was a way to pose her so that there weren't as many verticals on the buildings around to make it so off from that. But anyways, it might not be anything that could have been done about, or perhaps even just a crop so that it wasn't so off into the sky with that vertical that's not quite straight. That might have helped. So maybe that's my biggest takeaway, is just like pulling that back down. I know you lose quite a bit of that haze, but I'd still get a little bit of it if you cropped a little closer to the hat. I think that could be cool. Otherwise, the styling is cool. I think when we get a little feminine, so you have this edgy styling, right? So you have this unexpected elements out in the wild, so nobody wears a leotard out on the street. So that's definitely going to ring fashion right there. But there's edgy things happening with that sheer, and then the lapels on the thing, and then the hat. But then you've added a little bit of femininity to the makeup and the earrings. I like it, but if we want to make her look more like an editorial model than, say, a personal portrait or an actress, I could see her being an actress, or see her being a celebrity that you're photographing this way. But if we really want to stick with the idea that these are fashion portraits and she's supposed to be more like a traditional model, I think those feminine elements pull me away from the other styling elements, the makeup being heavy and the earrings. And they feel a little personal, like these are her things that she brought from home. I don't dislike them. This is a lot of personal taste flying into this. So if you disagree with me, do your thing. I like the shot. But I think whenever we bring in personal taste to something that is otherwise styled in an editorial way, you're going to make it feel more like a portrait than a fashion image. And that's okay. And that's your goal, then that's great. But coming from the perspective of, is this something that could be part of an editorial in Vogue magazine? I think the makeup and the earrings are pulling me away from that just a little bit. Pretty colors, love the pinks. This is not that unlike the image of the little girl. I think some of the editing techniques are very similar here. I'm going to ignore the writing on top just because I don't know the context of that. But some of the things I said about the little girl, right? Like the crop and the heavy bokeh in the background, the light flare, and this must be a trending editing technique in portraiture, and that's fine. It's beautiful. I actually visually really like it, but I think when you're playing into those visual elements, it's going to feel like portraiture instead of fashion. So I just might flip the switch on that a little bit, crop it a little closer, drop that bokeh out. If you get it in camera, great, but when it's done in post, tends to look a little more like portraiture. I do like the combination of the background colors and the stole that she's wearing. I kind of don't want her face so much up under that first stole. I feel like I want her either to connect eyes to camera or possibly even look the other way, maybe switch the arm altogether. There's something about it that's starting to make me feel like she's kind of trapped up underneath that stole. You have to be careful with arms up. There's a couple of traps that you get into with poses with the arms up. One is armpits are always really challenging, and the other is you tend to kind of hide the face or find ways where the face starts to feel a little crowded. So be careful of that. Otherwise, nice colors. Cool. Cool creative use of composition here. To be totally honest with you, a little real, I've been trying to do a few more things in my own portfolio that find new visual perspectives. So this idea of reflection or elements that don't just say, hey, there's a model or a subject from toe to head in the image, like doing these things with doubling or doing these things with other elements that create sort of an extension of the subject are really cool and a really cool way to surprise your viewer. So that's really neat. I still feel like I want to get a little closer. I feel like the crop for what it is could be even a tiny bit closer. It'd be interesting to see if I don't need much of that white sky at all. Like I wonder if it would feel bottom heavy to have him actually be less of the frame, and then the depth and the texture that comes from the water maybe takes up more of the frame, which would be a bit unexpected, right? Because we expect whatever is the primary image that's right up, for us to read in a typical way, that to be the thing that takes up most of the page. But it might be interesting to see it the other way around. There's just not a lot happening above his head, and I find myself wanting that just to go away so I can see him better. Other than that, I feel like the pose is cool. Might be a little more careful with the shirt, the way that it's kind of coming in some funny ways. I don't mind the lining of the jacket because it kind of blacks out in this instance. I know I've kind of picked on that in a few images. I like seeing the buildings. Might be interesting if there was a building on the other side, but you can't completely control what's in your image. But otherwise, yeah, mostly just about crop and composition and trying to figure out how to use that in your favor better. Cool image. Love a good black and white. Like I was saying, it's just kind of refreshing to me every once in a while. Did a great job using the light to emphasize the natural bone structure of this model. Using that light that's coming from around a corner, it feels almost like direct light, like when the sun is really beating in on a model, but it's just a little softer because it's slightly indirect coming around a corner. Very cool use of wardrobe. I always like a double collar when it's done right. I think that it looks unexpected. Love the fidget. It's something I give as a tip all the time for men's portraiture, which is just, have them kind of fuss with their wardrobe because it really feels spontaneous. If I had to get picky, I might say, you've got a little bit of cleanup detail maybe in the background that I think would be useful. Nothing major. Just at the bottom left corner, there's some situation that my eye kind of keeps going to. It's just a little messy along that vertical line. I might clean that up. I might, if I had a little bit of extra time to make the hair just a tiny bit more perfect right around the ear and the temple, that might have been something that cleans up for my lines a little bit more. And maybe even there are some opportunities to have elevated it further. I like the simplicity of it, but just to really make it just a wow shot, maybe some versions of it, maybe in shot 2, 3, 4, do some things where his feet pull out from underneath him more and he leans into so you get more of a diagonal composition that would then counter the more verticals of the other pieces of the composition. Just some thoughts. This little model is pretty. I like her. She really has a look to her that I feel like could be pushed in a lot of different directions. So I'm just gonna make suggestions on that. The light looks good, the composition is fine, and I'm just gonna take the fact that you have this beautiful model and just give suggestions, because I think this happens to all of us where we say, oh man, I have this great girl all of a sudden to work with that, this agency has given me, or I know, my cousin's friend or whatever, and then you blank on things to think about. So, so first thing would be something I've talked about a lot during this tutorial, which is the foliage. Not unattractive in this instance. The book is pretty, the lines of it are pretty, but it is gonna keep it with really neat and tidy, right in that realm of personal portraiture. I would try to find something more unexpected, even something nice and clean would really elevate it more to a fashion thing than foliage and so much greenery in the background. The other thing is gonna be the hand and the hip. This is a good image to kind of full circle back. The hand on the hip, I think, is cute because it's turned sideways. I certainly put models' hands on hips sometimes. It's just, if you do it, it's gotta be within the context of everything else being so cool and so edgy, because it's such an easy one to do that I wanna make sure that I'm telling you to do the thing that's not easy. So what's the thing that's not easy? So this is easy, so could she be, leaning back a little? Could she be cuddled up, something here? Should she be touching her face, doing whatever? Those kinds of things would be a little more interesting to look at and something that we haven't seen before. You can even push this really commercial, and then the greenery doesn't bother me quite so much if you want to make this more like a fashion advertising for, let's say this was like that dress is for a catalog for a company that's going to sell mostly to juniors. They want it really lighthearted. Even then, I think the posing, I would like to see her kind of play with the skirt that she has, or do something that feels a little more vibrant without a little more life to it. I think that the dress is fine, like I said, for commercial advertising, but this model could pull off any wardrobe. So I would try to find something a little more unexpected, a little more texture, a little more layering, something that's gonna push it a little bit harder. And I think lastly, the only other thing I might do, just a little personal preference, I tend to like for a model's eyes to follow their nose. So for example, this model's eyes are going far past the direction of her nose. She's so pretty that it's working for her, but it's just a good general rule that unless someone's really pulling off that side eye look, it can really trip you up and make the eyes look a little wonky. So just be careful of that. It's more of a general community critique than it is of this particular image, because she's got that coyness that's going on with it. So I think it's fine. I think I would have just taken an opportunity with this model to just push it. So I probably would have fundamentally changed things, but not because they aren't working here, but because it's an opportunity to really get something cool for your wardrobe when you have it. For your portfolio when you have a great model. That is the moment to really get creative and try things you haven't done before. This looks like a composite to me, so there's a lot of really cool things happening that are different than a lot of our other submissions. And that's the cool thing about natural light portraiture. I think sometimes when we first start out in photography, we think of studio photography as being like the pinnacle of everything that you can do. But really, every photographer I know circles back to natural light regularly, because there's things that you can do in natural light context that you can't do in the studio. So anything from fantasy to really sharp, poppy commercial work can all be in a natural light context. This is an example of that. To get nitpicky, my horizontals to me feel a little leaned left. I feel like I want them to go this way just a smidge. I can't tell which horizontal is being used. I guess it's the one at the edge of the road is being used as and then the ones that are the mountains feel like they're kind of falling. And so there's something about that that's a little visually disorienting. I think it's also partially because the clouds have that line too. So it just gives me a little sense of lean. Might try some different options, might see if there's some corrective tool to that. Also, one of the hairs comes really strongly across the face. It's starting to feel like it's cutting into the cheekbone. Not sure there's a lot that can be done about that. I do like the movement of the hair. It's just one of those things where you kind of wish that the circumstance had been subtly different and it just wasn't blowing quite so much to create a little bit of a mess, but overall, nice things. And I can't tell if it's a resolution issue or if it's a focus issue, but I've lost all focus in the feet. And I feel like in fantasy, focus is really important because it's supposed to be something that has an illustrative quality and sort of a sharpness and surreal quality to it that you have just a little less tolerance for changes in focus and areas of out of focus. Like I said, super nitpicky. Otherwise, it's a visually compelling image. I really like the red, really love the way that's blowing. The model is super dynamic, posing in a really cool way. Some really interesting things there. Last thing is, I'm not sure I understand the connection between the cowboy boot, which I think is probably about the bowl, right? The cowboy boots. But then the bra underneath is a bondage. It's sort of a bondage-inspired bra, which is trendy and fine. I'm not trying to make it like a thing. But those are some of the things that as we elevate our work and really try to become someone who is telling stories that everybody gets, making art that everybody wants to see, I really think that you have to start cleaning up where those inspirations are coming from and finding places where they don't connect. Some of that could be resolution here too. I may not be able to see the true design of the boot, but it looks like a classic Western boot, and then you have that bondage thing, and I think those two languages are different. This is a really cool dress. I like that element of this one. I think a lot of times we can take inspiration from just one element of a shot, a really cool dress, a really great model, a cool hair and makeup artist that can do cool things for us, and then build the concept around that. So because of that, two things. I wish that the dress were shown off a little bit more by turning a little more to camera. As we remember that a lot of times in fashion photography, the roots of it are really that we want to see the clothes. And in this instance, I feel like I want to see that dress a little bit more because it's the strongest thing in this whole image. The second thing is the accessorizing and location are not communicating with the dress as much as I wish that they would. The watch, for example, it might be a Rolex. I don't know. And actually, that's something I've learned over time is that I often have very fancy women who come in with their very fancy watches, and they want to wear them with evening gowns because it's kind of a society thing, I guess. I don't know. But to me, a watch never translates its level of niceness on camera in a fashion shot. So unless you have some really amazing, transcendent way of styling it, I would leave them out of fashion shots altogether, personally. So the watch, I don't think we need. I don't think the rings are really doing anything for us. The turquoise one isn't the same blue as the rest of the dress. I think that those are some things that I would change. I also think that the location is close. Like it could work because it's got some cool lines and it's got the lights coming in interesting ways. I just kind of feel like it needs to be more angled or more straight on, one or the other. It feels a little bit in between. And she's also just a little too far to the left, in my opinion. I think that she just compositionally doesn't really make sense why she's occupying so much of the left frame and there's not a lot on the right. So those are some things I would change. The natural light quality is pretty cool here. It's got that direct quality. It's kind of golden. I would maybe like to see it controlled a little bit more. But this is an instance where there's the strong light on the front while we're still maintaining a hair light in the back. And so that's some neat control of the light that was available, and some interesting use of it. I think the main thing is just I really want her to turn towards me a little bit more. Oh, I guess also when you have direct light, you have to be careful with skin tones. Her arm and her face don't match very well. Some of that might be makeup, just tones, or reflection or whatever. But, you might go in and post and try to see if you can get something a little closer, a little cleaner so that the face and the rest of it match. I think really now that I've kind of finished my spiel about it, a lot of those problems would be solved by a crop that brings that far right corner all the way up to her hand. I think some of that would fix a lot of the compositional problems and my issues with the background, and I think it would really serve the image pretty well. So my first top selection is none other than our funny one, because I want everyone to do what Megan Thompson has done here and be funny every once in a while and not take yourselves too seriously, not try too hard, because those are things that can be such a trap in fashion photography, and good artists can make fun of themselves and be lighthearted and still get something that's fun and interesting to look at. So that one is one of my top 4. The next one that I have chosen, I'm jokingly calling my bikini winner because I harped so much on bikinis and talked so much about women's images when they're undressed, and I think that this was a situation where someone handled it really beautifully. Turns out it was shot by a woman. I did not know that. It is by Laura Pierce, and it's just a really strong image that I enjoy looking at, so thank you for that. Another one I really loved, I'm calling my foliage winner. I think it's a strong image regardless of the foliage, but it is such a trend that I find in fashion photography, especially in small, quick projects, is people put somebody outside. And this was, out of the submissions to me, the best handling of that type of background. I did, like I said during the critique, I don't think that you have to desaturate it in order to fix that, but that was a tool that that Alvin Christian used in this one, and I think it's working really well. There's a lot of other elements I really liked about it, so this is one of my top. This one I'm calling my men's winner, my men's portraiture winner. We had quite a few men's portraits, and I was a bit surprised by that, and it also made for interesting comparison between them. This one won for several reasons that I went through in the critique. There just was a lot of things that really worked well, technically really beautiful, but also artistically and stylistically beautiful. And just as a side note, I think actually the community choosing men for a very quickie, short project was smart, because a lot of times with a men's project you have less hair and makeup issues, a little less decision making with styling, maybe not less decision making with styling, but so it might be a tip in the future. Think about having a male model for something that you might need to do more quickly than you can get done with the team you need for a female model. So the other announcement is that not only was this one my men's portraiture winner, but this one was my overall winner. Congratulations, Wesley Jones. This image kept drawing me back in. I kept coming back to it. And I actually wanted to double check to make sure that it was shot this week, because it's just so beautifully executed and well produced that it feels like something that took longer than a week to put together. So it's wonderful. Thank you for your submission, and we really enjoy this image. Lastly, thank you to everybody again. Thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of this, and hopefully we can do something like this in the future. Go submit to whatever is the next assignment. Make sure you're submitting regularly and really engage with your community. Pro EDU is such a resource. Thanks.